Welcome to Florida Education News. My name is Dr. Tony Arza, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Jaime Torrens, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a long time. And Jaime has worn a lot of hats in education. CFO in Miami, chief of staff. There's a litany of things that you've done. But I was really excited, when you were willing to sit down with us, because education in Florida has changed a lot. Education in this country has changed a lot. You've experienced a lot of those changes, and sometimes I always feel like, you can learn a lot from a book, but you can learn more from a person who's lived through a lot of these things. And so, I'd be really interested to hear a little bit about what you have to say about the changing landscape. But before we jump in, could you kind of say a little, what's your background? How did you get started? How did you end up, being one of the most, I consider one of the most influential people in education when it comes to facilities?
No, thank you, Tony. Yeah, I took a rather unconventional path. I'm an engineer by profession, and began with the school district on the operations side, and eventually grew to be chief facilities officer in charge of Miami-Dade, all facilities construction, maintenance, and operations. And then did that for like 12 years, and then was appointed chief of staff. And subsequently deputy superintendent, and those two positions dealt with COVID and emergency management, and which was another part of my career. My duties throughout the course were emergency management, hurricanes in South Florida. So I've seen a lot of changes in the past 40 years.
Yeah, and when people think of school districts, obviously they think of schools, they think of teachers, they think of classrooms. There's a lot that goes on around it, and you've been kind of really on the operational side of the house. There's a lot of things that have to happen in order to make sure the kids get there, that there's a building there waiting for them. Could you kind of share a little bit about like the dynamics of where you've fit into the education system and the work you've done to make sure that kids have safe facilities, make sure that they have somewhere to go?
Sure. That's in order for a student to learn, there has to be an environment that's conducive to learning, and that was basically my responsibility throughout many years, is to make sure that the facilities were safe, they were clean, they were well maintained. In South Florida in particular, air conditioning, making sure that all of the systems were working, because if a child is uncomfortable and a teacher is uncomfortable in a environment, in a classroom, their ability to teach and the ability to learn is jeopardized. So that was always our focus, making sure that the classrooms were ready, in particular at the beginning of the year, over the summer, any type of projects that needed to be undertaken to make sure everything was up and running and 100% when the students arrived in the fall. And then on a longer term was always the planning for facilities, construction, renovations, and in conjunction with that, finding the funding to make sure that all these projects could be undertaken, and that we were putting our resources, which were always limited, in the right places, in the highest impact types of projects.
Yeah, and not to call out any districts in particular, but in Florida we have an accountability system, and schools get graded, based on their academic performance. I think in recent years there's been this conversation about, you may have an A school district academically, but operationally there might be some limits. For instance, I think that's a comment that I've heard around Broward County Public Schools. I said I wasn't going to call them out, but no. But there have been some concerns about operationally, is it an A, and what are some of the things that we can do to improve? You have the unique advantage point, or advantage of being able to look at Miami-Dade County, which I would consider one of the leaders in education, and then you have LA, which is also a different vision of education, different environment, different understanding of business and how everything works. You have a really broad experience. What do you think about operationally how traditional public school districts and the public sector in general can improve the quality of its efficiency, the things that they're doing?
Yeah, I think people have a tendency to try and make the relation or the comparison to business. Education is unique. It's not, you can't really always say, well, you need to run it more like a business, because the end product is an educated child. So we have to keep that as our North Star at all times when we're looking at what we're doing. But I think there are things that could be done, improvements and efficiencies. When you mentioned transportation. Transportation is an area where a significant amount of resources are put into transporting children and making sure that that's done effectively, and that you're promoting attendance and good behaviors and making sure that that's supported. Comparison to LA and California, it's a different dynamic. There's still the same thing. All the professionals are dedicated to the same thing, making sure that we are focusing on students. But there are different things at play. I mean, there's the entire environment with labor is completely different from Florida, where you have they have the ability to strike. So that is always in the back of your mind when you're thinking about decisions that are being made regarding that. And the efficiencies. I mean, there are things that take longer. There's, we'll say, a greater amount of approvals. And for example, every project, when you're talking about a construction or renovation project, it has to go to the state architect. So it goes to an outside entity that could take, even for a simple project, could take 9 months to a year to 18 months just to get approval of a project. Where in Florida, each district has access to their own building officials, so you can have things expedited, put the proper resources. It's not a matter of cutting corners. It's just a matter of making sure that when these projects are put forth, that there's a priority as getting them approved, because you want to get these things done as quickly as possible. So that's just one area where there tends to be a longer delay. Projects that, from my experience in Miami and in Florida in particular, you could do a major renovation project maybe in 3 years. Some of the similar type projects may take twice as long when you're involving outside entities. So that's one area where, and when you do that, then things tend to cost more, because there's a lot more overhead, contractors that are engaged for a longer period of time, more uncertainty as far as when things are going to be completed. So.
Yeah, I'm curious from your perspective, because when I hear that and I hear about, states that maybe want to require things to be controlled at the center, far away from where the people that are being impacted are and where they live, what motivates? Because I imagine that with an engineer background, I understand the temptation to want to control things from the center, right? But then when you do that, it does create some of these inefficiencies, and some of the bureaucracies we've created were meant to. We wanted to have processes to make sure that good things were in front of kids, that you had good facilities, right? I mean, there was maybe a good intention, but it seems like But what other intentions might be at stake? Why is it that people would want, it to go to the state agency to be able to review things? Why not entrust the local officials?
Yeah, I mean, the code is the code. It doesn't matter whether it's a plan is being or project specifications are being reviewed by the state, or they're being reviewed by, like in the case of Florida, by a local building department or building official. They're bound to make sure that the design is up to the code of the most recent version of the codes. So I think it is more of a matter of control. The state agency wanting to make sure that all districts abide by the same level of, put the same amount of scrutiny with regard to projects. But there's really no good reason for doing it that way. I mean, in Florida, many decades ago, it was done that way. You had the plans were submitted to the Department of Education for review, and you had, and that changed to a more decentralized system. And I think we've seen great benefits from that, because districts are able to do things quicker. It is not up to now, in any experience that I've had, hindered the quality of the end product or the quality of the design of these schools.
Yeah, and as the landscape in Florida is changing, I'm sure that flexibility, the ability to move quickly, is going to be important. But a lot of districts have been complaining. Some maybe haven't complained, but they've been aware of the fact that there's shifting demographics and enrollment, and facilities are having to close. You have really dire situations like Broward. You have situations in Orange County, which also they're making some tough decisions. you've been in the background and you've lived the changing dynamics. You've mentioned to me before about, there was a time where you couldn't build schools fast enough, and then now you can't close them fast enough. How should leaders and also how should the citizens of Florida be looking at this changing dynamic? Should there be a concern, or is the goal mainly to make sure that the taxpayer assets are being utilized properly and allocated? What's your perspective on that changing landscape?
Sure. I mean, I see two angles to this. One angle, obviously, is a district with limited resources trying to operate more facilities than it needs to serve its students is not the best use of those resources. However, you have to balance that also with the programmatic side and making sure, while instinct may say, well, a smaller school is better, but a smaller school may also not offer the choices for the students. Specifically, when you get to secondary school, if you have a very small high school, it may have a sense that it's a nice place to go to school, but you may be limiting the students' ability for electives and for different types of programs and extracurricular activities. So I think that's the balance that has to be struck, and planning is key. I mean, having access to demographic information to not be surprised, and kind of you can see trends, observe trends, and to a certain extent, you might be able to affect those trends by decisions that are made. For example, in Miami, we had very high demand programs in sciences and high quality STEM programs where students many times had to ride either public transit or a school bus for over an hour to get to the school. So we had an issue with some under-enrolled schools in outer areas of the district, and decided, well, instead of making these kids and get on a waiting list to attend a program that had to ride an hour or 90 minutes, let's replicate those programs. So those are approaches to take some existing facilities, maybe repurpose them for other grade levels if necessary, and bring programs closer to where the students live. So that creates, it's very well received by the parents, but it takes an interaction with the community. We took pride in saying we were demand driven and not telling people where they should go, but listening to parents and listening to the community. What programs would you like to see closer to your neighborhood?
Yeah, and in this changing landscape, what jumps out at you in terms of things that maybe people are missing in this conversation? Right now, it seems like everyone is concerned about, obviously, schools that may have to close, schools that are very dear to parents and families and communities. We had a conversation before about how that's really a symbol of the culture and the community there. And some parents, they've wanted their whole life to be able to send their children to the high school that they went to. And that's obviously, you're touching something very close to a family and a community. But all of us together as citizens in Florida, we need to be making sure we're doing the best with what we have, right? Look, life's hard. We all get sick, right? And at some point we're all going to die. And so sometimes you have to accept the realities of we may no longer be able to offer that school. But what are people missing in the conversation that you see that maybe we're being a little bit too black and white on the issue? But what is really missing, or what's the key thing that you see?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, the school is the center of the community for a lot of people. You mentioned the example of the parent, but even in cases where you don't have the generational connection, there's still it's very difficult to make a decision to close a school. Nobody wants to see their neighborhood school closed. However, it's unrealistic to expect that you can operate schools with very reduced student population, and with no expectation that there's a trend of growing population. In particular, in the urban areas, a lot of this is driven by the overall economics. Things are getting more expensive, homes are getting more expensive, young families are not having as many children. So some of these trends are not going to be changing in the near future. But I think engaging the communities that would be potentially impacted and offering something to them, not just taking something away. For example, if you have 2 or 3 schools that are in a general area and all of them are under-enrolled, and you have the opportunity to make some capital improvements, rather than taking limited resources and diluting them among 3 schools, maybe say, listen, let's have a conversation. Can we take one of these schools and make it a more attractive with better programs, put more capital resources into one building, and then you can really offer something that the community may want, and make it a choice that people can buy into. They're the stakeholders. The parents are going to make the decisions about where their children are going to attend school. We want them to stay in the public schools, but give them other options rather than just that one building that may have been there for 50, 60 years.
I think one of the things that I see, and I mean, I'm curious your perspective, is that a lot of times when a district does have to make that difficult decision, they do have to close a school. There's a lot of distrust, I think, that the parents and the community has towards the leaders. And, I think that distrust is something that I think is growing. And I think that when you explain a little bit of the dynamics in California of sending the plans to the state, you're kind of dealing with a similar issue, right? Because we don't trust the person on the ground. We don't trust the person closest to the problem. How do you think that school boards and school districts can begin to rebuild that trust? Because there's a lot of distrust. I mean, distrust in media, distrust in information, it's growing. But how can we begin to rebuild trust in each other and to trust that, I may disagree with the decision that you have to make and close that school, but do I trust that you have my best interest at heart? How can we rebuild that kind of trust?
I mean, community engagement cannot be overstated how important that is, and to not allow decisions that are coming, postpone them until they then become emergencies, and then you have to act very quickly to close the school because you just can't keep it open. So I think having a broader conversation so the communities don't feel like they're being singled out, like you're only doing this to my community and why aren't you doing it to another community? Just get the sense that this is a district-wide or county-wide issue that needs to be dealt with, and have receive the impact and receive the input and actually listen to what people are saying. Don't just go and have a town hall meeting and still with a preordained decision already before you get there. Go with an open mind if you're the district leadership, and see there may be things that you haven't thought of or the district hasn't thought of that you could learn from the community to help guide those decisions. You may end up in the same place ultimately, but at least there will be a dialogue, and you can better explain to people that, yeah, we listened to you, and in some cases you may adjust the decision. In other cases, it may be inevitable just because of the demographics and the size of some of these campuses.
Well, we can definitely use more dialogue in our culture, I think.
Sure.
But one of the things that in Florida has happened, and I know you're aware of, is this public-private partnerships on building schools and things like that. There have been some innovative things. I know Polk did something, DeSoto County Public Schools did something. I'm just curious about what's your perspective on school districts maybe exploring alternative vehicles to build facilities? Because even though there are districts having to close schools, and in some of those cases, they actually need to build new schools in different areas where they're having growth. I think about it in Homestead and Miami-Dade. But that's happening everywhere in the state. What are some of the new things that you see happening that can create pathways that facility leaders and people who are planning, they should look at and consider in order to be able to understand what's out there?
The P3, the public-private partnerships are an excellent opportunity also for districts, and there are districts that are growing. I mean, in Florida, it's not all declining enrollment. So in those cases, this presents a great opportunity because your demand is ahead of where your revenue is. So you need the schools today, but you may not be able to generate the revenue to build those schools until sometime in the future. So a public-private partnership with potentially with a lease purchase or different procurement vehicles presents a great opportunity for those districts. And in even some of the urban districts, as you mentioned, if you're building a new school where you're planning to attract more students, we're an area that is still growing, because even some of the larger urban counties are growing, and just the buildings are not where the students are. This again offers an excellent alternative to the traditional design bid build, where you have to allocate or define the funding source first. Here, the private sector partner could identify funding and potentially build even quicker than the school district could, because they're basically a one-stop shop. They do the design, the construction, and everything. They provide equipment, furniture, so provide a turnkey alternative. So yes, definitely something the district should look at.
Yeah, and and I'll ask my last question because I'm always curious about the business side of the house. Having the opportunity to ask you and learn from you is an honor. But when it comes to like procurement, maybe some people don't really understand the nuances of that process. And one of the things I've been talking with some board members, and one of the things that board members want to do is make sure that there's a competitive process, that it's fair. And I think that people don't realize how complex the procurement processes are, and how sometimes it seems like it's in the hands of more technical processes and that there aren't maybe real people behind. I'm just curious about how can we make sure that how could procurement processes in Florida be improved to make sure that that the people closer to the voters, or obviously you don't want the board members doing those things, but more that the community's voice is represented in those, because sometimes I feel like it's just a technical process. Some people, they calculate the numbers almost automatically. There's some questions around the process. Sometimes people have bid protests. I'm just curious, how could Florida improve its procurement process? Because it gets back to the whole trust thing of how are we using taxpayer dollars? How are we making sure we're getting the best deal? How do you look at that? So you have so much experience in that space.
One thing in particular with regard to construction and whatever, not necessarily just construction, but any type of professional services being procured, there is the opportunity to bring in a community representative to sit on selection committees. We did that very often whenever we were either selecting architects or construction management firms, because that provides an additional layer of transparency. Somebody that's respected in the community come in and actually be a voting member of a selection committee. I think that adds credibility and adds value to the district also, because you have not just district staffers and employees of the school district, but you have now an outside voice, and it could be more than one. You could have either voting members or non-voting members, but have folks that basically have their ear to the ground, if you will, on what the community's concerns are, and making sure that their voices are heard, and the selection process of when you're doing a qualifications-based selection, there's a certain amount of judgment involved. It's not just a price. When it's something as regard to like a bid, you're taking the lowest qualified bid. There's very little room for any type of other interaction, because it's based on the price or it's been submitted by a vendor. But whenever there's a qualifications base, that's a request for proposals, there is value to doing that as well.
Yeah, well, look, it's been a great honor to talk with you and to learn a little bit about the business side of the house. Hopefully soon, maybe we'll get school grades for the operational side, and a lot of districts will need the guidance of someone like yourself. So thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
All right.